Welcome to our annual press conference, which is usually held at the start of or just prior to the start of the hurricane season. To speak to us this morning, we have Mr. Ronald Jackson, our Executive Director. And so without much further ado, I hand you over to Mr. Jackson.
Thank you very much, Tara, and let me welcome all the members of the media here in Barbados and also to those listening on our live streaming in our member states. I also want to welcome members of the CDEMA family to this press conference. I have asked you all here to share with you some insights into the June 1 start of the hurricane season. We particularly like to get off to an early start before June 1. Typically, we would have had our press conferences on June 1, but we believe that symbolically we need to send a message that preparedness for the hurricane season really should start before the start of the hurricane season. And so this is certainly a good time for us to send this message that we're going ahead of the typical June 1 start. And in the future, this may well become part and parcel of the feature of how CDEMA will seek to treat with its press conferences on hurricane readiness. But it is important that as we reflect on the upcoming hurricane season, we don't just talk about the predictions and the forecasts provided. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what CDEMA is doing to ensure that there is readiness not just within the CDEMA regional system itself, but also what we're doing with the member states so that individually they can increase their level of readiness. So we'll talk a little bit about the strengthening of country capacities as well, and then get into the predictions for the hurricane season and our perspective on the predictions shared. And I also want to use the opportunity to talk about other hazards. We tend to get focused on the hurricane season because we know it's June too soon, and then all over by the time we get to the end of November. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the other hazards because we are seeing other hazards impacting the region as we speak. We are still in the very dry season and we are always susceptible to earthquakes, and the potential for volcanic eruptions exists within the region, given that we still have volcanic islands and active volcanoes within the region. So as we get ready to go into the hurricane season, we have to focus very heavily on a 360-degree approach to readiness. CDEMA's mandate requires it to provide coordinated support to its affected member states in the event that they make that request, or I would also add, in the event that we are unable to hear from them during an impacted situation, we would then seek to deploy our assets in that regard. And so as we set out to ensure that we are meeting this aspect of the mandate, CDEMA has been engaged in a process of building capacity within the system, training members of the national disaster organizations in a number of areas. We've heightened our regional training. We've been working with the uniform groups. We call them the CDRU, CARICOM Disaster Relief Unit. We've gone through extensive training with members of the CDRU in early May, and there are activities that are going on now in St. Kitts, which will also see the testing of the CDRU as part of our process for readiness. In further strengthening the CDEMA system, we've had our typical regional exercises looking at telecommunications, also looking at how we would deploy our assets, but more importantly, what CDEMA is doing differently based on the lessons over the last few years, and in keeping with the mandate of the agency and recognizing the varying capacities of our member states, is to develop 2 new teams for deployment. And even as we speak to you, those members are currently in training. We anticipated teams of 6 for what we call our CDAC, which is our Damage Assessment and Coordination Team, or our CARICOM Damage Assessment and Coordination Team, and our COST, which is our CARICOM Operational Support Teams. We anticipated 6 to start June 1, but we now have 30 people in training and orientation to start the June 1 season. This is again recognizing and learning from the lessons of the December rains in 2013 that our member states will invariably require assistance to improve the rapid damage assessment and to provide information that will allow targeted response, not just within country by the government itself, but also targeted response by external support, friendly governments, donors, which CDEMA itself also coordinates through what we call the Eastern Caribbean Donor Group Partners Mechanism. As we focus on the development and deployment of the CDAC and the cost, we're also strengthening the capacities for damage assessment and needs analysis. We recognize that this is an area where greater enhancement is required. We're doing some work on examining the role of gender within the response scenarios, and that will also feed into the strengthening of how we collect information on post-impact situations and also target the needs, not just of the general population, but begin to look at the needs of children, women, pregnant women, the elderly, the disabled, so that the resources that we're able to mobilize in country and externally are in fact meeting the needs of the population that are affected. We expect this to be a game changer. We are hoping that we don't have to deploy these assets, but in the event that something happens, we are certainly looking forward to an improvement in the way that our member states and indeed the regional system is able to provide support going forward. In relation to the examination of readiness, I recall some time ago, CDEMA was asked if we could measure and identify the level of readiness of our member states. And we indicated that we're doing some work towards that particular future. And I'm happy to report that we are closing in on that future desired state where CDEMA will be able to analyze and determine the state of readiness of its participating states. In that regard, we have commenced the rollout of the Comprehensive Disaster Management Audit Tool developed by CDEMA. That tool provides benchmark and indicators looking at all stages, phases of the disaster management cycle. It looks at our efforts to mainstream disaster management into the key sectors within our member states, so we'll be able to assess where we are within these key sectors. We'll be able to assess where we are in terms of the capacity of the National Disaster Management Offices and their programs. But more importantly, we will also be able to sort of benchmark where our member states are in relation to their efforts at being ready to deal with multiple hazard impacts. That audit is currently being rolled out. We're targeting around 9 of the 18 participating states in the first round. We will be careful to sample to ensure that we are reflecting the varied situations within the 18 member states. So we're going to be picking countries that are giving us a sense of what is happening in other countries, for example, within the OECS, within the smaller British overseas territories, and also within the larger countries, whether it is Jamaica, by virtue of population or landmass in the case of Guyana. That is also going to be a game changer for CDEMA and for the member states, because it will provide us with not only information about where we are, but provide significant input to our efforts at developing national and regional programs for disaster management. It is also going to provide significant information to other stakeholders and partners who are working within the context of the CDM strategy to deliver the desired future state of a resilient region and safer lives within the Caribbean. CDEMA is not the only member that is delivering these kinds of regional public goods to the member states. There are other donors, there are other actors such as the CIMH, 5Cs, and others who are working. But we will be able to get a bigger sense of what the gaps are and to provide that information to all of our key stakeholders. Turning now to our efforts collectively at how we are working to strengthen the capacity within the region, noting that being ready for the hurricane season or any hazard doesn't start at June 1, as I've said before. You have to really invest in a number of other areas, not just in terms of your capacity to respond, But the success of how we will make it through any adverse event also depends on the work you're doing in preparedness and also in risk reduction, loss reduction. And in that regard, CDEMA is happy to state that we have, with the support of the European Union, launched our country direct fund. The application went out in early May and will close on June 30th. It is the first year of the rollout of this country direct fund. It is part of the broader CDEMA country-centered programming approach, where we have moved away from the one-size-fits-all approach. Certainly there will be a little element of that, where when we analyze the needs of our countries, you may find that 3 or 4 or 5 may have the same needs. And so our support package may be designed around that aggregation of needs. But what we've done differently is to really sit down and dialogue with our countries individually to determine what are the specific priorities within our member states. And we're going to be targeting and working with them towards addressing those particular priorities. Part of the main reason for that thrust is recognizing again the varied capacity within our member states. And oftentimes we will hear mention of the slow or low uptake of resource support by member state or limited absorptive capacity of our member state. We think that the way around that is to ensure that we are in fact working with them to identify and define the needs and to help them in a stepwise process to address those particular needs. And we're going to be using the Country Direct Fund as a major pillar of the support that we will be providing to the countries. And if you will permit me, I think I want to share just some of the areas that our member states have been requesting support through the country-centered programming approach. We've so far have requests from about 75% of our member states. So this is 12 of the member states pretty much. They are looking at support for the updating of their national disaster management plans, for exercise design, development, and testing, so they can hone and sharpen their emergency response teams. They're looking for capacity building in search and rescue, both maritime and land. They're looking for support in community-based disaster risk management, support in operational capabilities of our sub-regional hubs. We have 4 sub-regional hubs supporting the member states: Jamaica, Barbados, Antigua, Barbuda, and Trinidad. And so they're asking for strengthening of those hubs so that they can perform the task of being the staging area to support, pretty much as Barbados did in the December rains that affected Dominica, St. Vincent, and St. Lucia, where Barbados is the sub-regional hub for those islands, and they provided the staging area for support to those islands. And so they've asked for strengthening of their capacities in that area to allow them to continue with that activity. They've asked for support in community emergency response team development, support in early warning systems, not just looking at floods, but ensuring that these systems are multi-hazard in nature, and also support in strengthening their telecommunications infrastructure. And so CDEMA will be expecting that a number of the applications for the Country Direct Fund that was launched in early May will reflect these particular priorities, and we will be providing not just cash resources but also technical human resources to assist them with the rollout of these particular areas as requested. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to now turn our attention to the hurricane season, because what we've shared with you is the steps we're taking to prepare all year round, both from a programmatic standpoint and also from the preparedness for response standpoint. But as we now look to the impending start of the hurricane season, June 1, we note the forecast by Professors Gray and Clockbatch, where they've provided an update this morning, I gather, or yesterday, given the visit, I think, of the President of the United States to their offices. They have typically provided updates on April, June 1, and later on around August. This year, perhaps like last year, they've shortened that time, and they've provided an update to what they've previously provided. In April, they provided that we would have 7 named storms. three of them which had the potential to become hurricanes and one major hurricane. They've now updated that to suggest the possibility of 6 to 11 named storms, 3 to 6 major, 3 to 6 hurricanes, and up to 2 major hurricanes. So they're expecting perhaps 0 or as much as 2 major hurricanes with a 70%. They're looking at a 70% chance of an expected below average hurricane season. The average season is roughly around 12 named storms, 6 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. So they're expecting 70% chance of the season being below average. What they are pointing to for this possible below average season is the emergence of the El Nino. And the El Nino and La Nina is essentially the characteristic cooling and warming of the ocean. And so while in the Pacific, it is likely to be wetter in the Caribbean and Atlantic. It is expected that we're going to continue to see the dry conditions which we've been experiencing over the earlier part of this year to continue, and that suppresses tropical cyclone activities. And so because of that, they're expecting that there is likely to be less of an activity during the course of this year. Now, what CDEMA wants to advise our public across the region is not to treat that as a cause for complacency, because we have seen in previous years' forecasts where the forecasters have been there or thereabouts, maybe 1 or 2 storms outside of what they've forecasted. But we've seen evidence where there has been wild variations around what is forecasted, based on the expectations of the El Nino and changes. But more importantly, we have to recognize that it only takes one, and I'm not even going to say one hurricane, it takes one tropical disturbance to cause significant damage to our already fragile ecosystems, or already fragile economies which are coastally dependent, and our settlement patterns are coastally and very much based along waterways, rivers, etc. And so one tropical disturbance can lead to significant losses and loss of lives, as we've seen over the many years of our experience within our region. And so we are encouraging vigilance in that regard. We're not by any means encouraging our public to treat a below average year as a reason to be complacent. So there has to be vigilance. We know that in our Caribbean there is growing vulnerability given the current fiscal climate within the region. I know that the various governments are making every effort at improving the poverty levels, but there is certainly growing vulnerability and the exposure remains. So as we've seen in the December rains, where it was not a hurricane or a tropical storm, we saw in St. Vincent 15% loss to the gross domestic product. So that is significant. We've seen in Jamaica an average of between 2.5 to 2.7 losses per GDP over a 10-year period, where there were no, I would say, direct impact from hurricanes, but near passages of the eye, grazing the coastal area, as well as significant periods of rainfall associated with tropical depressions and tropical storms. And 2.6 and 2.7% in an economy such as Jamaica is also very high, because you're looking at that time at an average of roughly around $14 billion of the economy that had to be diverted to deal with recovery and reconstruction. One can only think the opportunity lost in terms of what that could have been doing in the areas of education and health, which are very important social aspects of our various island economies. And so if we look at that, certainly we have to be vigilant. The way to deal with these events is to build a culture of loss reduction. At the individual level, there's much we can do to reduce the level of exposure that we have at our household level, and I'm encouraging our public to seek to do that. At the national level, there is much we can do collectively to improve the picture by improving how we plan, and make development decisions, strengthening our own, we talk a lot about insurance and the importance of, regional insurance, but we can also self-insure by virtue of how we save. So it is important that we apply these very simple rules to being ready. So vigilance is important. The other message I would add there is the importance of preparedness. We can never be too over prepared. And even at households that are low income, there are steps we can take. Certainly we expect that our various national governments will provide through their ongoing social programs to support the most vulnerable, but we have to look at our individual levels to self-insure by saving, not just by going to the regular insurance agency, but saving, if we know that we have challenges in recovering. And I also want to say that a successful response, a successful national response, really depends on an engaged community. An engaged community. So we are promoting the involvement of the community in these particular situations of response. So if we look at VIP, the three main messages we want to leave there is vigilance, involvement of the community, and preparedness. Right? I call it VIP so I can remember it. So those are three things that we want to promote in this hurricane season. Now, as we move into the hurricane season, we have to recognize the effects of the dry period on our region. We have been seeing tremendous increases in bushfires or brush fires, depending on where we are in the region. And so, despite the best efforts of our fire services, I think that we have to encourage and call for more responsible behavior at the household level in terms of how we set fires, and to refrain from setting unmanaged fires, because this is certainly burdening the state's resources in trying to respond to those situations, which are in many instances illegal, and diverting the resources from responding to other fires that may occur, threatening the lives of others. And not only that, these bushfires are being set sometimes in the spaces that are close to human settlements, putting others at risk. So we are very much encouraging our public to refrain from the lighting of fires. We are still in a dry period, even as I said to you before, we are expecting these dry conditions to continue, dry and windy. So it's very dangerous to have these fires. We're also encouraging the conservation of water, as we go forward, because we are not sure exactly when the dry conditions will in fact break. So we are seeing this cyclical situation in the region now for a few years. We're not sure whether or not it may very well be related to climate change. It is also possibly related to the ENSO phenomenon, which is a 3 to 5 year cycle of the dry conditions and so forth. So the point here is that we need to be responsible and to ensure that we are refraining from the setting of fires and also to conserve water. As I said before, even though we're focusing on the hurricane season, we are in fact vulnerable to a number of hazards. We have significant exposure to earthquake risk, and in our volcanic island chains, we still have some active volcanoes. And that, in that regard, I want to use the opportunity to commend the work of the Seismic Research Center, who've been doing quite a bit of research on seismicity. They've been doing significant monitoring of the activities within the region. We note that the activities in and around Barbados and in and around the Eastern Caribbean has increased significantly. Whether or not this suggests that we're going to have an earthquake, we can't say. But the point here is that we have to again remain vigilant because of our location and our exposure to earthquakes and the potential attendant tsunamis that can come with that. And so we want to commend the work being done by the SRC to improve the science behind the hazard itself and to produce the sort of data sets that will improve planning, decision making, and response. They're doing the same thing in terms of looking at the volcanoes in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and in Dominica. They're partnering with various research institutions in other countries and doing significant work in studying the volcanoes in Dominica and St. Vincent, and coming out of that, CDEMA and other key players, including the governments of Dominica and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, will be able to pull this into their policy making around development decision. But also we will be able to use that to strengthen the preparedness and response program for volcanic risk as well as for earthquake risk. So we just want to use this opportunity to commend them for the work they're doing. In closing, I want to thank our partners, the U.S. Southern Command, the European Union for the support. We've also received significant support from the government of Canada and the government of the UK and also the government of Austria in assisting CDEMA to continue to strengthen the capacities within our regional system. And also the government of Australia, I should say. They've departed our shores in a sense, but they've also made significant contributions leading into the end of 2014 that we're now benefiting from in 2015 and going forward. So we want to thank them for their support and continued support to the regional system as we seek to build a resilient Caribbean and to also promote safer lives. Thank you very much, and I'll leave myself for any questions that you may have.
Mr. Jackson,
Yes.
finally speaking,
Yes.
how much we made available to the Caribbean?
Well, the goodness, I don't have the, Andrea can probably share the actual quantum, but we are going to have, I think, in each year, we will have at least 2 calls where a member state can access up to 60,000 euros per call. The applications will be vetted objectively by a panel, and those that are meeting the requirements that have been set will be able to access that 60,000 euro to carry on any defined program that they have submitted that is aligned to those areas that I shared with you earlier. So it's in this first, because of the rolling out of the fund, in this particular period, there will be 1 call for CDEMA's annual year, which is work year, which is September 1 to August 31st. So between May 1 and August 31st, 2015, there will be 1 call. But come September 1, 2015 to August 31st, 2016, there will be 2 calls. So within this window from now till August 31st, 2016, there is an opportunity to access 3 times of that 60,000 euro for the member states who qualify. And this fund is likely to be, it's roughly about 1.7 million euros, and it will be available for up to, I think, 3 years, Andrea? Or 3 years or?
It ends 2019.
2019. So it will take us up to 2019. We will be rolling out those calls periodically up to then.
The comprehensive development tool, when exactly will,
The audit tool.
yes, yeah,
Yes, when
exactly will that be coming on stream? I know you said soon, but.
we started it. We are hoping, we had targeted the end of June. We may go a little bit into July, but we are hoping to have collated and if not completed the analysis well on the way in analyzing the information we would gather from those 9 member states.
You're satisfied so far with the preparedness in your countries?
No, I'm never satisfied, and I'm going to be very frank about that. I think there is quite a bit more that needs to be done in our member states. In fact, the area of preparedness for response has not been one that has benefited from significant investment of resources, either nationally or within the broader programming within the region. And that is one of the reasons why CDEMA has actually positioned preparedness and response as one of its main priority programs that it will be seeking to have resourced to ratchet up that level of readiness in our member states. The audit that we're rolling out, as I said to you before, a component of that will look at benchmarking where the member states are in terms of readiness, because that is going to feed into that program for preparedness for response that we are currently operating. So we're not happy. We think that more needs to be done. And I would also like to say here that we are very excited as a region about climate change, which we should be. It is very important that we take it seriously. But I have a particular pet peeve that the focus on climate change has largely been heavy on clean technology, energy efficiency, which is important because that is also going to mean a major game changer for our economies. But we've not seen the requisite focus on the areas of preparedness for response, noting that no investment that the region will make in reducing emissions is going to save the region from the impact of climate change, because we are not at all close to being the major emitters. In fact, forgive my math if I got it wrong, but we're somewhere in the region of either 0.1 or 0.01% emitters collectively. Now, if we reduce that, we're still going to be impacted by it. And if the Paris talks result in a positive outcome towards reduction, we're not going to see the healing of the planet to such that we will see a reduction in the effects of climate change on the region. And what we're talking about are the effects are largely to be increased climate-related events that can lead to disasters given our exposure, whether it is health-related. So we talked about CHIP-V, an increase in vectors that we saw. It is proposed that you will have more of those, more floods, more droughts, but we're not investing in ability to cope with these expected scenarios. We're not increasing the capacity of our first responder corps, the fire services, the health services, and I do recognize that we are in an era of significant economic challenges. But I think there's more that we can do, more that we can do individually as states, and more that we can do collectively as states, which is the reason why entities such as CDEMA was created. We have to begin then to look at what is the value proposition we can put forward, going back to the intent behind the creation of CDEMA, to ensure that the region itself can collectively stand against the expected impact of the ravages of climate change. We're not seeing that investment in preparedness for response, or in coping, noting that we won't be able to prevent every hazard impact within the region. And so I'm not happy. Just to go back to answering your question, I'm not happy at all. I think there's more that we have to do individually and more that we have to do collectively in that regard.
Any other questions?
No. I mean,
Okay.
all right. Can I get one in charge?
Okay, sure, no problem. Well, if there are no further questions, we will conclude our annual press conference. We want to say thank you so much for joining us this morning and for your continued support, because we recognize that the media has an important part to play in ensuring that we have a safer, more resilient Caribbean. At this point in time, and you would have heard the ED reference it earlier in his statements, we have a training session underway for the cost and the CDAC, and they've consented to allow CBC to take some footage, and there may be an opportunity for interviews with our national disaster coordinators. If you're interested, please let us know.
Thank you very much,
We also,
ladies and gentlemen.
we invite you to go over there.
Yes, I'm going to join you.
There's no mention of
Oh, I did. I said in terms of the work.